Shy Waitress, signed to Mafia boss, Deaf Mother. His reaction left everyone in tears. The restaurant fell silent as the raised voices cut through the refined murmur of conversation. Two men at table 9 were arguing, their faces flushed with wine and anger. Lila noticed a young boy at their table, perhaps 12, his hands moving in agitated signs. Without thinking, Lila stepped forward. Her hands moved in gentle, graceful signs. "Your father is worried about you," she signed to the boy. "He wants you to be safe." The boy's eyes widened in relief at being understood. He signed back rapidly. "They're fighting about me. About school." Lila nodded, continuing to sign as she spoke aloud. "Sometimes adults forget what matters most. Maybe we could get some of our famous tiramisu? It might help everyone remember this is supposed to be a happy family dinner." The boy smiled. His father turned, anger faltering as he watched his son's animated response. The other man's shoulders relaxed, slightly. "Tiramisu sounds good," the boy signed. "Dad loves tiramisu." In the darkened private booth near the kitchen, Dario Valenti set down his scotch. His eyes tracked the waitress's movements, the quiet confidence in her stance, the elegant precision of her signing. He'd never really noticed her until now. He watched, captivated, as she diffused the volatile situation with nothing more than gentle signs and a soft voice, turning a potential violent confrontation into something manageable, something human. "Sir?" His bodyguard leaned in. "Should we handle table 9? Dario raised his hand slightly. "No. Let her work." The sight of her graceful fingers shaping words in the air stirred something he thought long buried, something that had died with his sister years ago. He took another sip of scotch, unable to shake the image of peace amid chaos. All from a waitress he'd never truly seen before tonight. The restaurant had emptied, leaving behind the lingering sense of garlic and a wine. Lila wiped down the last table, her movements precise and efficient in the dimmed lighting. Only one customer remained, the man from the private booth, sitting perfectly still as he sipped his espresso. She'd noticed him watching earlier during the incident, his presence like a shadow in the corner of her eye. "Miss Moreno." Marco, the floor manager, strode toward her with his face twisted in displeasure. "A word, please." Lila's stomach clenched. She'd known this was coming after she'd stepped in between those men at table 9. Following Marco to the service station, she kept her eyes down, hands clasped tightly together. "What were you thinking?" he hissed, keeping his voice low but sharp. "Those weren't ordinary customers. You don't interfere with—" The situation required handling. A deep voice cut through Marco's tirade. The man from the booth had approached without a sound, his expensive suit immaculate even after hours in the restaurant. She managed it well. Marco's face drained of color. "Mr. Valenti, sir, I was just—" "Leave her be." The words were quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. She'll face no consequences for her actions tonight. Lila looked up then, meeting Dario Valenti's gaze. His eyes were dark and unreadable, like looking into still water at midnight. Everything about him radiated controlled power, see from his perfectly tailored suit to his rigid posture. He was handsome in a severe way, all sharp angles and cold precision, the kind of man her mother had always warned her about. "Thank you," Lila said stiffly, fighting the urge to step back. "But I can handle this myself." Something flickered in those dark eyes, surprise, maybe amusement. No one else would have caught it. But Lila was used to reading the smallest shifts in expression. Years of communicating with her mother had made her fluent in the language of micro-expressions. "I'm sure you can," he replied, his tone neutral but his gaze intense. "Good evening, Miss Moreno." She didn't wait for dismissal, gathering her coat and bag quickly. The weight of his stare followed her as she left through the employee entrance, making her skin prickle. The Chicago night air bit through her thin jacket as she started her walk home. The streets were quiet this late, with only the occasional car passing by. Her footsteps echoed on the empty sidewalk as she picked up her pace, eager to get home to her mother. The sound of an engine behind her made her tense. Headlights swept across her back, casting her shadow long in front of her. The vehicle slowed, matching her pace for a moment that stretched like taffy. Lila's heart thundered in her chest, but she kept walking, refusing to show fear. Just when she was about to break into a run, the car accelerated and drove past. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows disappeared around the corner, leaving her alone in the pool of yellowed streetlight. Lila released a shaky breath, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled her jacket tighter. The encounter in the restaurant played through her mind. The authority in Valenti's voice, the way Marco had practically cowered before him. She thought of the men at table 9, how quickly they'd backed down when she'd started signing to the young boy. There were things about La Rosa Nera she'd always chosen to ignore. The private meetings in the back room, the way certain customers commanded fearful respect, the occasional raised voice quickly silenced. She was good at staying invisible, at keeping her head down and doing her job. But tonight, she'd been seen, and something told her that Dario Valenti wasn't a man who easily forgot what caught his attention. Sunlight filtered through the tiny kitchen window of their modest apartment. Lila's hands moved gracefully through the morning air as she signed to her mother about last night's events. The smell of coffee and toast filled their small space. The customers were difficult, she signed, her movements deliberately casual to downplay the tension. But everything worked out fine. Rosa's sharp eyes missed nothing. She set down her coffee cup, her weathered hands moving with maternal concern. "You look tired, mi amor. These late shifts worry me." Lila smiled, reaching across their scratched kitchen table to squeeze her mother's hand. "I'm okay, Mama. The pay is good, and the tips help with rent." She didn't mention the incident with the arguing men or the dark-eyed owner who had intervened. Some worries were better kept to herself. Rosa's expression remained troubled. "Promise me you're being careful." "Always," Lila signed, then glanced at the clock. "I should go. Early shift today." She kissed her mother's cheek and grabbed her worn jacket. Outside, the morning air bit through her thin clothes. A sleek black car idled across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the weak autumn sun. Lila barely noticed it, her mind already on the day ahead. At La Rosa Nera, the morning prep was in full swing. Servers polished silverware, while kitchen staff chopped vegetables and kneaded dough. The manager, Marco, intercepted Lila before she could reach the locker room. "The boss wants you on his private service today," he said, his face unreadable. Lila's stomach dropped. "Mr. Valenti?" Marco nodded grimly. "For efficiency," he says. "Watch yourself, girl." When he notices someone, he left the warning unfinished. The other servers stopped their work, stealing glances. Their whispers carried across the room, "Poor thing, and better her than me." Everyone knew what happened to people who caught Dario Valenti's attention. They disappeared, or worse. Lila's hands trembled as she tied her apron. The morning dragged by, each minute heavy with anticipation. When Dario finally arrived at his usual corner booth, the restaurant's atmosphere shifted. Conversations hushed. Even the clink of cutlery seemed muted. She approached his table, forcing her steps to remain steady. He sat alone, elegant in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent. A leather portfolio lay unopened beside him. "Good morning, Mr. Valenti," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Would you like to start with wine?" He looked up, and Lila fought the urge to step back. His eyes were darker than she remembered, intense but not unkind. "The Brunello," he said softly. "And Lila?" Her name in his mouth made her pulse jump. "Yes, sir?" How long have you been signing? The question caught her off guard. It wasn't threatening or demanding, just curious, personal. His gaze dropped to her hands, and she resisted the urge to hide them behind her back. Since I was little, she answered carefully. My mother. She's deaf. It's how we communicate. He nodded, something flickering behind his controlled expression. For a moment, he looked almost human. Then his phone buzzed, and the mask slipped back into place. The wine, please. The click of Lila's heels echoed through the Blaw's empty restaurant as she followed Marco, the floor manager, toward the back office. Her stomach churned. No one got called to the owner's office after hours. At least, no one who came back to talk about it. Mr. Valenti is waiting, Marco said, gesturing to the heavy wooden door before scurrying away. Lila's hand trembled slightly as she knocked. The office beyond was exactly what she expected from the mysterious owner, sleek, modern, and cold. Chrome and black leather dominated the space. A massive desk commanded the room's center, its surface pristine except for a single manila folder. Dario sat behind it, his dark suit immaculate even after a full day. His expression revealed nothing. Please, sit. He gestured to one of the chairs facing his desk. Lila perched on the edge, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The leather was cool against her legs. I've been reviewing your file. He tapped the folder. 2 years of excellent service, no complaints. You're reliable, punctual. His eyes met hers. And discreet. She nodded, unsure where this was leading. I'm expanding our private events division. Exclusive gatherings, high-profile clients. The pay is significantly better. He named a figure that made her eyes widen. I want you to head it. Lila's heart raced. That kind of money would mean no more scraping by, no more choosing between medication for her mother and repairs for their aging car. But something in his too careful tone set off warning bells. That's very generous, she said slowly. But I prefer my current position. A flicker of something. Surprise? Amusement? Crossed his face. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. You should consider carefully before declining. The benefits package is comprehensive. Full medical coverage. Dental. Life insurance. The kind of insurance her mother desperately needed. Lila swallowed hard. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Valenti, but Dario, he corrected softly. Mr. Valenti, she insisted. I need to decline. He studied her for a long moment, then stood. Lila fought the urge to shrink back as he circled the desk, coming to lean against it directly in front of her. This close, she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle. You should never refuse protection when it's freely given. His voice was low, almost intimate. The words sent a chill down her spine. I don't need protection, she managed. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Everyone needs protection in this city, Lila. Some just don't realize it yet. She stood quickly, needing to escape the intensity of his presence. If that's all? He nodded once, watching her retreat to the door. She forced herself not to run. The night air hit her face like a slap as she left through the employee entrance. 2 men lounged against a car across the street, not even pretending not to watch the door. One nodded at her. A greeting? A warning? Her steps quickened all the way home. The deadbolt clicked twice as Lila secured their apartment door. She leaned against it, breathing hard, only to find Rosa watching her from the kitchen doorway. Her mother's hands moved in familiar patterns. You're home late. What's wrong? Nothing. Lila signed back, but her shaking hands betrayed her. Rosa's expression grew concerned. Someone frightened you? Lila nodded slowly, sinking onto their worn couch. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of headlights. A dark car cruised past their building, moving too slowly to be a casual driver. Her mother's warm hand covered hers, stilling their trembling. When Lila looked up, Rosa's eyes were full of understanding and worry. "Someone important?" her mother signed. "The restaurant owner," Lila admitted. "He offered me a promotion. But, but I don't think it was really about the job." Lila's signs were hesitant. "There's something else. Something dangerous." Rosa squeezed her hand. Outside, the car made another pass. The dinner rush was winding down at La Rosanera. Lila balanced a tray of empty wine glasses, her feet aching from another long shift. The kitchen's warm glow spilled into the dimly lit hallway as she made her way to the back entrance. Everything felt normal, routine, until it wasn't. The explosion came without warning. One second Lila was walking, the next she was thrown against the wall as the back door erupted in a violent fireball. The blast knocked the wind from her lungs, glass shattering around her like deadly rain. Screams filled the air, mixing with the crackle of flames and the shriek of car alarms outside. Through stinging eyes, she saw kitchen staff stumbling through thick black smoke. Someone was crying. The acrid smell of burning chemicals made her gag as she tried to stand, her ears ringing from the blast. Then he appeared like a demon through the smoke. Dario Valenti, his expensive suit covered in soot and blood. His face was a mask of cold fury as he grabbed stunned employees, shoving them toward safety. His usual controlled demeanor had vanished, replaced by raw, lethal energy. "Move! Everyone out!" His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He worked methodically, checking corners and storage spaces for trapped staff members. Lila tried to help a fallen waitress, but the smoke was becoming unbearable. Her lungs burned with each breath. The edges of her vision started to blur as she stumbled, reaching blindly for support. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. Through swimming vision, she saw Dario's face above her, his jaw clenched tight. Blood streaked across his white shirt, whether his or someone else's. She couldn't tell. "You're coming with me," he growled, scooping her up against his chest. She tried to protest, but could only cough weakly, her head spinning from lack of oxygen. His arms were like steel bands around her as he carried her through the smoke-filled corridor. The last thing she remembered was the cold night air hitting her face before everything went dark. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments, soft sheets beneath her, the quiet hum of central air, unfamiliar shadows dancing on high ceilings. Lila blinked slowly, trying to piece together where she was. She lay in an enormous bed, the mattress more luxurious than anything she'd ever felt. The room around her was massive, decorated in rich woods and cream-colored silks. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, catching moonlight from tall windows. Movement caught her eye. Her mother sat in a plush chair nearby, hands folded nervously in her lap. When their eyes met, Rosa's face flooded with relief. She quickly signed, "Thank God you're awake." Lila tried to sit up, wincing at the ache in her chest. "Mom? How did you get here? Where are we?" "Safe." The deep voice made her jump. Dario stood in the doorway, his bloody shirt replaced by a clean black one. He held his phone in one hand, speaking rapid Italian into it while his eyes remained fixed on her. After a sharp command, he ended the call. "You're in my home," he said, stepping into the room. "Both of you will stay here until I determine the threat is neutralized." Lila's mind spun with questions. "What threat? We can't just— You're under my protection now." His tone left no room for argument. That explosion was meant as a message, one I don't intend to ignore. Looking between her worried mother and this dangerous man who'd saved her life, realization dawned cold and clear. They were trapped, not by locks or guards, but by circumstances beyond her control. Whatever game was being played, She and Rosa were now pieces on the board. The phantom smell of smoke still clung to her hair as she sank back against the silk pillows, understanding with growing dread that their lives had changed irrevocably in the space of a single explosion. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across marble floors. Lila blinked awake, her head pounding. For, at a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed beneath her felt too soft, the sheets too silky against her skin. This wasn't her cramped apartment with its creaky twin bed. Then it all came rushing back. The explosion, the smoke, Dario carrying her out. She sat up too quickly, making her head spin. The bedroom was bigger than her entire apartment, decorated in cream and gold. Everything screamed wealth. The crystal chandelier, the hand-painted walls, the plush carpet that probably cost more than she made in a year. Her mother sat in an armchair by the window, completely absorbed in a leather-bound book from the nearby shelves. Rosa looked up and smiled, her hands moving quickly. "Good morning, sweetheart. How do you feel?" "Confused." Lila signed back, her movements sharp with anxiety. "Where exactly are we?" "Mr. Valenti's house," Rosa replied, looking around with appreciation. "He brought us here after the explosion. Such a gentleman." Lila's stomach clenched. Through the windows, she could see men in dark suits patrolling the manicured grounds, guns visible under their jackets. This wasn't hospitality. It was captivity. She pushed herself out of bed, still wearing last night's smoke-scented uniform. Her legs trembled slightly as she crossed to the door. It opened before she could reach it. Dario filled the doorframe, impeccable in a charcoal suit despite the early hour. His presence seemed to make the room smaller. "You should be resting," he said, his voice carrying that same quiet authority that made everyone at the restaurant jump to attention. "We're leaving," Lila announced, lifting her chin despite her racing heart. "Thank you for your help last night, but we need to go home." "That's not possible." His words were final, brooking no argument. "The explosion wasn't random. My enemies are sending messages. You were seen with me, which makes you a target. I'm a waitress." Lila's voice cracked. "I serve food. That's all. You're under my protection now." He turned to Rosa, his expression softening slightly. His hands moved in, halting careful signs. "You safe here. Please stay." Rosa's face lit up at his clumsy attempt at sign language. She signed back slowly so he could follow. "Thank you for protecting us." Lila watched in disbelief as her mother actually smiled at the man who was essentially holding them prisoner. "Mom, he's dangerous," she signed quickly. "We can't trust him." "He learned to sign," Rosa replied simply. "Bad men don't learn to speak new languages just to be kind." Dario watched their exchange with intense focus, clearly trying to follow the rapid signs. When he couldn't, frustration flickered across his face, the first real emotion Lila had seen from him. "Your mother understands," he said to Lila. "This is for your safety. My men will guard you. Whatever you need will be provided, but you cannot leave." He turned to go, then paused. "I'm sorry it had to be this way." For a moment, something like regret shadowed his features. Then his mask of control returned, and he was gone. Lila waited until his footsteps faded before slumping against the wall. She moved to the window, watching the armed men patrol below. They weren't just keeping others out, they were keeping her in. The gilded cage might be beautiful, but it was still a cage. "No way out," she whispered, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Behind her, Rosa hummed contentedly, already at peace with their new prison. But Lila felt the walls closing in, suffocating her with luxury and fear. The dining room gleamed with old money and power. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across dark wood panels and Renaissance paintings. Lila's hands trembled as she helped Rosa into a high-backed chair. The mahogany table between them stretched long enough to seat 20. Dario entered silently, his presence filling the room. He'd changed from his usual black suit into a charcoal sweater that softened his sharp edges. The guard at the door disappeared with a nod from his boss. "I hope you're both comfortable," Dario said, his voice quiet as he took his seat. His eyes found Lila's, searching for something she refused to give. "The chef has prepared osso buco. It's a house specialty at La Rosa Nera." Rosa's eyes lit up as servers brought steaming plates. The rich aroma of braised veal and herbs filled the air. Lila watched her mother's delight with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. This man had saved them. Yes, but at what cost? "Thank you," Lila said stiffly, unable to ignore her mother's happiness. "For dinner, and for—" she gestured vaguely at their surroundings. Dario's expression remained unreadable as he poured deep red wine into crystal glasses. "Your safety is my priority now." Rosa's hands moved in elegant signs. "The food smells wonderful, just like my grandmother used to make." To Lila's surprise, Dario's hands lifted in careful, practiced movements. His signing was basic but determined. "I'm glad. You like it." Each gesture was studied, deliberate. Rosa beamed, signing back encouragingly. Lila watched in disbelief as her mother corrected his form gently, showing him how to angle his wrist for glad. He mimicked the movement with surprising humility. The meal progressed, with Rosa teaching Dario new signs between bites. His usual icy control melted slightly under her mother's warm guidance. Lila found herself caught between wanting to trust this softer version of him and remembering the blood on his shirt from the explosion. "Many years since feeling safe," Rosa signed, her movements graceful and sure. "Thank you." Dario's response was slow but genuine. "Honor. To protect. And you both." Lila pushed her food around her plate, the veal suddenly tasteless. How could her mother not see through this act? Yet watching Dario stumble through signs with genuine effort, his usual mask of authority replaced by careful concentration, it pulled at something inside her. She didn't want to examine. After dinner, Lila helped Rosa to her room, kissing her mother's cheek goodnight. Instead of returning to her own quarters, she lingered in the shadowed hallway, needing air. That's when she heard it. Dario's voice, sharp as a blade, floating up from his study below. "Find them. All of them. I want the names of every person involved in that bombing within 24 hours. A pause. Then, colder still. "No survivors. Make it slow. Make it hurt. I want them to understand exactly who they've crossed." The contrast between his gentle signs at dinner and these brutal orders made Lila's stomach turn. She pressed herself against the wall, heart pounding as his footsteps approached the stairs. This was the real Dario Valenti, not the man who learned sign language for her mother, but the one who ordered deaths as easily as he'd ordered dinner. She slipped away before he could spot her, but sleep proved impossible. His two faces haunted her, the patient, student learning to sign, and the monster plotting violence in the dark. Both were real, both were dangerous, and she was trapped here with them both. The mansion's industrial kitchen gleamed with untouched potential. After 3 days of confinement, Lila had discovered this space was her only refuge from the constant watch of Dario's men. Here, amid the familiar clink of pots and pans, she could almost pretend they weren't prisoners in a gilded cage. Rosa's eyes lit up as Lila demonstrated the proper way to knead pasta dough. Their hands worked in tandem, flour dusting their aprons while morning light streamed through the high windows. This was their third cooking lesson since being brought here, a way to fill the endless hours and keep the anxiety at bay. "Like this, Mama?" Lila signed, her movements exaggerated to show the proper technique. Rosa nodded enthusiastically. mimicking her daughter's motions with the dough. The familiar rhythm of cooking together brought a slice of normalcy to their surreal situation. Lila reached for more flour, then froze. In the doorway stood Dario, his dark suit immaculate as always, watching them with an unreadable expression. How long had he been there? Her heart jumped, but she forced herself to remain calm, remembering how he'd been oddly gentle with her mother at dinner days ago. "Don't stop on my account," he said quietly, stepping into the kitchen. His presence seemed to fill the space, making it smaller somehow. Rosa noticed him and smiled warmly, signing a greeting. To Lila's surprise, he responded with careful, practiced movements. "Good morning." Lila's hands stilled in the dough. "You've been learning," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. He moved closer, his steps measured. "I have a good teacher. Private lessons, twice daily." He paused, watching Rosa shape the pasta with methodical care. "Your mother deserves to be spoken to directly, not through translations." The admission struck Lila speechless. It was such an unexpectedly thoughtful gesture from a man she'd seen ordering violence in whispered phone calls. She couldn't reconcile these two versions of him, the brutal mob boss and this man who took sign language lessons in secret. She finally asked, wiping flour from her hands. His dark eyes met hers. "Because words matter, even silent ones." Rosa, oblivious to the tension, proudly held up her finished strip of pasta. Dario's usual stern expression softened as he signed. Slowly but clearly, "Beautiful work." Lila watched their interaction, confusion churning inside her. Was this genuine care or elaborate manipulation? The man had essentially kidnapped them. Yet here he was, learning their language, treating her mother with respect that few hearing people ever showed. "I should check on the sauce," Lila said abruptly, needing space to think. She turned to leave, but Dario's hand caught her wrist. His touch was light, almost hesitant, so different from his usual commanding presence. His fingers released her immediately, but then they moved in careful signs she recognized. "Thank you for your patience." His execution was imperfect, but the sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. The gesture left Lila rooted to the spot, her skin tingling where he'd touched her. She managed a small nod before escaping to the pantry, her mind spinning with possibilities she didn't dare examine too closely. From the kitchen, she could hear her mother's muted laughter and Dario's low voice as he attempted more signs. The sound wrapped around her like a dangerous comfort, making her wonder if perhaps there was more to their captor than she'd first assumed. Lila pressed her hands against the cool metal shelving, trying to ground herself. That simple touch, those careful signs, they would haunt her thoughts for hours to come, she knew. In the dim light of the pantry, she couldn't tell if that realization thrilled or terrified her more. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mansion's circular driveway as Lila stepped outside. Dario waited by a sleek black SUV, his tall frame casting an imposing silhouette. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. "Get in," he said, opening the rear door. His tone left no room for argument. Lila hesitated. "Where are we going?" "Supply warehouse inspection. It's safer than the restaurant right now." His dark eyes met hers. "Your mother will be protected here." The leather seats were butter-soft as she slid in beside him. His driver, Marco, navigated through Chicago's morning traffic, while another guard rode shotgun. Lila watched the city blur past, trying to ignore how Dario's presence filled the space between them. "The bombing wasn't random," Marco explained, breaking the tense silence. "The Castellanos are angry about losing their supply routes. Boss cut them off last month when they started dealing to kids." Dario's jaw tightened. They needed a reminder about boundaries. The warehouse district loomed ahead, all concrete and steel under the pale sky. Marco pulled into a private lot surrounded by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Two armed guards stepped from the shadows to check their vehicle. That's when Lila saw movement on a nearby rooftop. Everything happened in seconds. Marco shouted, "Down!" as bullets shattered the rear window. Dario's body covered hers, pushing her to the floor. The guard up front returned fire while Marco swerved behind a loading dock. "Stay down," Dario ordered, his voice ice-cold. He pulled a gun from his jacket and stepped out, using the car door as cover. More shots rang out. Lila pressed her hands over her ears, heart thundering. Through the broken window, she saw Dario move with lethal grace. A man charged from behind a dumpster. Dario spun and fired twice. The attacker crumpled. Blood spread across the concrete. Lila couldn't look away. Dario stood over the body, weapon still raised, scanning for more threats. In that moment, he wasn't the controlled businessman who watched her sign with her mother. This was the predator beneath the suit, the killer everyone whispered about. What terrified her most was how her pulse quickened at the sight of his raw power, how his violence thrilled as much as it horrified. The ride back was silent. Lila's hands trembled in her lap as she processed what she'd witnessed. Dario had killed someone. To protect her. The thought made her dizzy. His voice finally broke the quiet, rough like gravel. "You're safe because you're mine now." Lila swallowed hard, unsure if his words were meant to comfort or claim. In his world, maybe there was no difference between protection and possession. She stared out the window, feeling the weight of his gaze, knowing her life would never be the same. The mansion creaked with midnight silence. Lila tossed in her silk sheets, the day's violence playing behind her closed eyes. Every time she drifted off, she heard gunshots, saw blood on concrete. Sleep refused to come. With a frustrated sigh, she slipped from bed. The hardwood was cool beneath her bare feet as she padded down the hallway. A warm glow spilled from beneath the library door. She hesitated, then pushed it open. Dario sat in a leather armchair, his usual pristine suit jacket draped over the back. His white shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, tie loosened. The soft lamplight caught the silver at his temples. A laptop balanced on his knees, his hands moving carefully in the air as he followed along with an ASL tutorial video. He looked almost human. His head snapped up at her entrance, hands dropping. For a moment, neither spoke. Then his lips curved slightly. "Can't sleep?" he asked, voice rough with fatigue. Lila shook her head. She gestured to his laptop. "You're really learning?" His eyes held hers. "I keep my promises." She drifted closer, drawn despite herself. The library smelled of leather and old paper. Bookshelves, stretched to the ceiling. A testament to wealth and education. Or perhaps just appearances. "Show me what you've learned," she said softly. His hands moved hesitantly through basic signs. "Hello. Thank you. Please." His fingers were elegant, but uncertain, so different from the sure way he'd handled his gun earlier. "Your form needs work," she murmured, perching on the arm of a nearby chair. "Like this." She demonstrated slowly. He mimicked her movements, brow furrowed in concentration. When he fumbled a sign, frustration flickered across his face. "I'm not used to imperfection," he admitted. "Nobody is perfect at first." She paused. "Why are you really doing this?" Dario was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My sister." His voice dropped low. "She was like you. Gentle. Good with people." "Was?" "She died." His hands clenched. 7 years ago. Caught in crossfire meant for me during a territory dispute. Raw pain edged his words. She was 19. Lila's chest tightened. She could picture it. A young girl with his sharp features, cut down too soon. The weight of that loss lived in the shadows behind his eyes. "I'm sorry," she signed. His laugh was bitter. "Sorry doesn't bring her back. Nothing does." He met her gaze. "But when I saw you sign that night at the restaurant, for a moment, I saw peace. Real peace." The confession hung in the air between them. Lila's heart thundered against her ribs. This glimpse of vulnerability felt more dangerous than his anger. "Show me again," he said roughly, changing the subject. "The sign for thank you," she demonstrated, moving closer to adjust his hand position. His skin was warm beneath her fingers. When she started to pull back, he caught her wrist gently. "Thank you," he signed, his touch lingering. Heat bloomed in her chest, spreading like wildfire through her veins. His eyes had gone dark, intense. The air felt thick with unspoken things. Lila jerked away, pulse racing. Without a word, she fled the library, taking the stairs two at a time back to her room. Safe behind her closed door, she pressed a hand to her hammering heart. The ghost of his touch still burned on her skin. This was dangerous. He was dangerous. So why couldn't she stop thinking about the grief in his eyes, the careful way his hands had moved through the signs, the warmth of his fingers against hers? Sleep would be even more impossible now. Thunder rattled the mansion's windows, making Lila jump as she moved through the dimly lit hallways. The storm had rolled in suddenly, bringing sheets of rain that transformed Chicago's skyline into a blur of shadows and streaming water. Lightning flashed, illuminating the expensive artwork on the walls in brief, stark bursts. Down in the living room, Rosa sat contentedly watching a movie with subtitles, unbothered by the brewing storm. Lila envied her mother's calm. Since the bombing at the restaurant, Lila's nerves stayed on edge. Every unexpected sound making, her heart race. The power flickered once, twice. Lila's hands trembled as she checked another window's lock. The security team outside stood stoically in the rain, their black suits darker where water streamed off them. Their presence should have been reassuring, but it only reminded her of why they needed protection in the first place. Another crack of thunder made her gasp. The lights went out completely this time, plunging the hallway into darkness. Lila pressed her back against the wall, trying to steady her breathing in the pitch black. "Scared of the dark?" Dario's voice came low and amused from somewhere to her left. Lila's heart leaped into her throat. "Don't sneak up on me like that!" Lightning flashed, illuminating his tall frame at the end of the hall. In that brief moment, she caught the ghost of a smile on his face. "I thought you'd be downstairs with Rosa." "I'm checking the windows," Lila said defensively. "Ah, yes, because my security team might have forgotten how locks work." His teasing tone made her bristle. "Stop it," she snapped, weeks of frustration suddenly bubbling to the surface. "Stop acting like this is all normal, like keeping us prisoner here is for our own good. You don't get to control every aspect of my life just because you decided to." The power came back on, revealing Dario much closer than before. His expression had hardened. "Prisoner? Is that what you think this is? What else would you call it?" Lila challenged, lifting her chin. "We can't leave. We can't contact anyone. Your men watch our every move. I call it keeping you alive," he growled, closing the distance between them. "Because the people who bombed my restaurant would love nothing more than to use you against me." "Use me against you?" Lila laughed bitterly. "I'm nothing to you. Just another waitress you're keeping under your thumb." His hands slammed against the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. The playfulness was gone from his voice. "If you were nothing to me, you'd be dead in that restaurant explosion." Lila's breath caught as she realized how close he was. She could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. His eyes burned into hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Then what am I to you?" she whispered. Thunder boomed outside. The lights flickered again, casting shadows across his face. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air felt charged, electric with unspoken tension. Lightning split the sky. In that brilliant flash, Dario's control finally snapped. His mouth crashed down on hers, desperate and demanding. Lila gasped against his lips, her hands instinctively gripping his shirt. The kiss was everything she'd feared it would be. Dangerous, all-consuming, addictive. His fingers tangled in her hair, tilting her head back as he deepened the kiss. She should push him away. She should run. Instead, Lila melted into him, matching his intensity with her own suppressed desire. His other hand slid down to her waist, pulling her closer as thunder shook the walls around them. The storm rattled the windows of the mansion, thunder cracking like gunshots through the dark halls. In the library, candles flickered across leather-bound books, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Lila's lips still tingled from their kiss, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at Dario. He stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair. The gesture was so human, so unlike his usual controlled demeanor, that it made her breath catch. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice rough. "But you did." Lila's fingers moved automatically, signing along with her words a nervous habit. Dario watched her hands, transfixed. The candlelight softened his sharp features, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the monster. He sank into a leather armchair, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "My sister," he started, then paused. "Marina. She used to fidget with her hands, like that when she was nervous." His jaw clenched. "The night she died, I was supposed to protect her. I failed." Lila stepped closer, drawn by the raw pain in his voice. "What happened?" "Rival family. They were aiming for me." His eyes met hers, dark with memory. "She was 16. After that, I swore I'd never let anyone close enough to become a target again." Lightning flashed, illuminating tears in his eyes that he quickly blinked away. Lila felt something shift in her chest, a wall crumbling. "I understand fear," she said softly, her hands moving. "My whole life, I've been afraid. Afraid for my mother. Afraid of men like you." She gave a bitter laugh. "Afraid of the world." Dario reached for her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Yet you stood up to me. That first night in the restaurant, you weren't afraid." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But being afraid doesn't mean you stop living." He pulled her closer, until she stood between his knees. His hands framed her face, with careful reverence, as if she might shatter. "You bring peace," he murmured. "When everything in my world is violence and chaos, you make it quiet." Lila's heart thundered in time with the storm. She leaned into his touch, tired of running, tired of fear. When his lips found hers again, it was different from their first explosive kiss. This was slower, deeper, full of unspoken words and desperate need. His hands slid down her back, drawing her onto his lap. She could feel his restraint in the tension of his muscles, in the careful way he held her. But she didn't want careful anymore. "I choose this," she whispered against his mouth. "I choose you." Something broke in him then. His kiss turned hungry, possessive, yet still achingly tender. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, laying her on the leather couch. Candlelight painted gold across their skin as clothes were slowly discarded. Every touch was a question and answer, every kiss a promise. His scarred hands traced her body like she was precious, while her fingers mapped the stories written in his skin. When they finally came together, it was with a passion that rivaled the storm outside, raw and powerful, yet safe in its intensity. Later, as lightning still flickered beyond the windows, Lila lay curled against his chest. His heartbeat was strong and steady under her ear. Dawn was breaking, pale light mixing with the dying candles. Dario's fingers combed through her hair, his other hand signing clumsy but sincere words. "I'll protect you both," he whispered into the quiet. "No matter what." Lila looked up at him, seeing both the dangerous man she'd first feared and the broken one she'd grown to understand. For the first time since the restaurant explosion, she felt truly safe. The morning sun filtered through heavy curtains, casting long shadows across unfamiliar silk sheets. Lila's eyes fluttered open, her hand instinctively reaching across the empty space beside her. The warmth lingered, but Dario was already gone. Her fingers traced the indent where his body had been, and memories of the previous night flooded back. His touch, his whispered confessions, the way vulnerability had softened his usual sharp edges. A gentle knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, pulling the sheets higher. Rosa appeared with a breakfast tray, her knowing smile impossible to miss. She set down coffee, fresh pastries, and fruit with deliberate care, signing with one hand, "I made your favorite." Lila felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Rosa tactfully busied herself straightening already neat curtains. When their eyes met, her mother's expression held no judgment, only a gentle understanding that made Lila's throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, Mama," Lila signed, grateful for the normalcy her mother brought to this strange morning. The day unfolded with unexpected tranquility. In the massive kitchen, Lila and Rosa fell into their familiar rhythm, chopping vegetables and kneading dough. The guards' usual stern expressions softened at the smell of fresh bread and Rosa's signature marinara sauce. Even Marco, the most intimidating of Dario's men, couldn't hide his appreciation when Rosa insisted he taste test the sauce. Lila found herself relaxing, despite everything. She caught herself humming as she worked, her hands moving through the familiar motions of cooking while signing recipe modifications to Rosa. The kitchen, filled with warmth and the comfort of shared work. Throughout the day, Dario appeared briefly, stealing glances at Lila that made her pulse quicken. Each time their eyes met, she saw echoes of last night's tenderness beneath his controlled exterior. He signed "beautiful" to her once when no one was looking, his fingers forming the word with careful precision that showed his practice. As afternoon mellowed into evening, the kitchen grew quiet. Rosa had retired to read, leaving Lila to finish cleaning up. She was putting away the last pot when Dario's phone buzzed on the counter. His expression transformed instantly, the warmth vanishing, replaced by something cold and deadly. His jaw clenched as he read the message, knuckles white against the phone's dark screen. "Someone betrayed me," he muttered, the words falling like stones into the peaceful quiet they'd built. Lila stood frozen by the sink, watching as the man who'd held her so gently last night disappeared behind walls of ice and fury. The mahogany doors of Dario's study burst open as two guards dragged Marco inside. His usually impeccable suit was wrinkled, his lip already split. Lila, who had been arranging flowers on the sideboard, froze at the sudden violence. "Leave her," Dario commanded without looking at her. But his men blocked the exit, and she found herself trapped in the corner, watching the scene unfold. Dario's voice was deceptively soft. "Tell me again what you told Castellano's men." Marco's shoulders slumped. "Boss, I swear it wasn't. Don't lie to me." Each word dropped like ice. "Phone records don't lie, neither does the money trail." The silence stretched until Marco broke. "They offered triple what you pay. Said they just wanted information about restaurant security." His voice cracked. "I didn't know they'd bomb the place. I didn't know about the girl." The change in Dario was instant and terrifying. Gone was the man who gently signed with Rosa at breakfast. This was pure predator. He moved with lethal grace, grabbing Marco's throat. The girl. His whisper could have cut glass. What about the girl? Marco's eyes darted to Lila. They know about her. Her mother, too. They've been watching the mansion. The crack of Dario's fist connecting with Marco's jaw echoed through the study. Lila flinched as Marco crashed into the desk. But Dario wasn't finished. Each blow was calculated, precise, a surgeon with violence instead of scalpels. 8 years, Dario snarled between strikes. I took you off the streets, gave you everything. Blood sprayed across imported carpet. And you sold us out. Lila pressed herself against the wall, unable to look away. This was the reality of his world. Not the gentle hands that traced her skin last night, but these hands that dealt death with casual expertise. Marco's pained groans filled the room. Please, Marco gurgled through blood. I can fix it. Like you fixed my sister's death? Another brutal strike. Was that Castellano's money too? Understanding dawned on Lila's face. Marco's betrayal went deeper than today. Dario's carefully controlled fury was years in the making. When Marco slumped unconscious, Dario stepped back. His knuckles were split and crimson, his white shirt spattered with red droplets. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, contained violence incarnate. Then, he turned to Lila. Their eyes met across the destruction. His were dark with promises of retribution, hers wide with the truth of what he was. Blood dripped slowly, from his hands onto the Persian rug. I'll fix this. His voice was rough gravel. Lila looked at Marco's broken form, at the elegant study-turned crime scene, at the monster wearing her lover's face. Her whisper carried all her heartbreak. You can't fix you. The words hung between them like shattered glass. The city lights blurred through rain-streaked windows as Dario paced his study, phone pressed to his ear. His knuckles were still raw from Marco's beating, specks of blood staining his white cuff. Lila watched from the doorway, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I want them moved within the hour, he barked into the phone. Full security detail, no one gets within a mile without my approval. His voice was pure ice now, all traces of the gentle man from last night gone. Lila's mother sat in the adjacent room, blissfully unaware as she watched TV with subtitles. The peaceful domesticity they'd found here felt like a distant dream now. I'm not going, Lila said quietly, when he hung up. Dario turned, his expression dangerous. This isn't a request. You can't just pack us up like furniture whenever you feel like it. Her hands shook as she signed while speaking. A nervous habit. We're not your property. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, crowding her space. No, you're my responsibility. His fingers brushed her cheek. My weakness. She jerked away from his touch. I'm tired of being someone's weakness or responsibility or possession. I want to be free. Free? He laughed without humor. There is no freedom now. Marco sold you out. The Castellanos know about you, about Rosa. They'll use you to get to me. Because of choices you made. Your enemies, your violence, your world. Lila's voice rose. I never asked for any of this. No, you didn't. His voice softened dangerously. But here we are, and I will burn this city to ash before I let them touch you. The raw possessiveness in his words made her shiver. This was the real Dario. Valenti, the man who commanded fear, who dealt in death as easily as breathing. Your protection comes with too high a price, she whispered. His hands gripped her arms, pulling her close. There is no price too high for keeping you safe. Before she could argue, his mouth crashed down on hers. The kiss was brutal, desperate. Nothing like their tender exchanges the night before. This was possession, fear, rage all mixed together. His fingers dug into her skin as if he could keep her there by force of will alone. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. The car leaves in 20 minutes. Pack what you need. Dario, don't. His voice cracked slightly. Just go, please. She looked up at him, seeing the war behind his eyes. The man who wanted to hold her versus the one who needed to send her away. Without another word, she turned and went to help her mother pack. 20 minutes later, Rosa and Lila sat in the back of a heavily armored SUV. 4 more vehicles formed a protective convoy around them. Through the tinted windows, Lila could see Dario's silhouette in the mansion's upper window, watching them pull away. His last words echoed in her head, "I'll come for you when it's safe." But as the mansion disappeared into the rainy night, she wondered if anything would ever truly be safe in his world. Rosa squeezed her daughter's hand, signing with her free one, "He does this because he loves you." Lila closed her eyes, leaning back against the leather seat. Love shouldn't feel like a prison, she thought. But as they drove into the darkness, she couldn't deny the ache in her chest, or the fact that she'd left part of her heart behind in that mansion with a man who dealt in death but kissed her like she was his salvation. Through the rain-streaked glass, Dario's figure grew smaller until it disappeared completely, swallowed by the night and the growing distance between them. The safe house sat nestled in a quiet suburban street, its normalcy a carefully constructed facade. Lila stood at the kitchen window, watching shadows lengthen across the manicured lawn. Something felt off. The usual guards who patrolled the perimeter were nowhere in sight. Even the black SUV that always idled in the driveway had disappeared. Her hands trembled as she dried the dinner dishes. Rosa sat in the living room, absorbed in a book, unaware of her daughter's growing unease. The silence pressed against Lila's ears like cotton, suffocating and wrong. In the 2 days since they'd arrived, there had always been some sound. Footsteps on gravel, radio static from the guards' earpieces, car engines purring. But now, nothing. Lila's phone lay dead on the counter, another oddity. The battery had drained suddenly an hour ago, and none of the chargers in the house seemed to work. She glanced at the landline, its cord suspiciously frayed. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the house. Lila froze, dish towel clutched in her white-knuckled grip. That sound hadn't come from Rosa's direction. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she inched toward the living room. "Mom?" she signed with shaking hands. Rosa looked up, her expression shifting from calm to concern as she read her daughter's fear. Another creak, closer now. Lila gestured frantically for her mother to hide, but it was too late. The French doors exploded inward in a shower of glass. Dark figures poured through the opening, their faces masked, weapons drawn. Lila screamed, lunging for Rosa as strong arms grabbed her from behind. She kicked backward, connecting with someone's shin. A grunt of pain, then a hand clamped over her mouth. Rosa stood, her face pale but determined as 2 men approached her. She signed rapidly, her movements sharp with anger. Though they couldn't understand her words, her maternal fury needed no translation. Lila managed to yell through her captor's fingers. She bit down hard, tasting blood. The man cursed and loosened his grip enough for her to slam her elbow into his solar plexus. She broke free, running toward her mother. A different man caught her hair, yanking her back so hard tears sprang to her eyes. "The boss wants both of them alive," he barked. "Don't damage the merchandise." Merchandise. The word made Lila's stomach turn. She thrashed harder, watching helplessly as they grabbed Rosa's arms. Her mother didn't make a sound, she never did, but her eyes screamed volumes. "Please," Lila begged as they dragged them toward separate vehicles. "She needs her medication. Let me stay with her." One of the men laughed, the sound ugly and harsh. "You'll see her soon enough. Boss has plans for both of you." Terror clawed up Lila's throat as they shoved her toward a black van. This couldn't be happening. Dario had promised to protect them. Where were his men? Where was he? In desperation, she threw back her head and screamed his name. Dario! The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood, but no help came. No sirens wailed in the distance. No cavalry of suited men with guns appeared to save them. Miles away, in his downtown office, Dario Valenti's phone rang. He answered it with his usual cold efficiency, one hand loosening his tie after a long day of meetings. The voice on the other end spoke just 3 sentences. The crystal tumbler of whiskey slipped from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. For the first time in years, raw emotion cracked through his carefully maintained facade. The phone fell from nerveless fingers as he stared unseeing at the Chicago skyline, his reflection showing him a truth he'd tried to deny. He looked exactly like his father had the day Dario's sister died, broken, haunted, destroyed by his own hubris. History was repeating itself in the worst possible way. The words echoed in his mind, "We have them both. You know the price. Don't make us send them back in pieces." The city trembled that night, not from thunder or earthquakes, but from something far more dangerous, a man possessed. Dario Valenti moved through Chicago like a storm, his usual calculated control replaced by cold fury. His men spread across the city in black SUVs, while others monitored police frequencies and security cameras. The criminal underground buzzed with whispers. The boss had gone feral. 3 warehouses already lay in smoking ruins, their occupants broken and bleeding before they gave up what they knew. In his office, Dario's knuckles were split and bloody as he gripped his desk phone. "Find them," he ordered, voice deadly quiet. "Turn this city inside out." His second-in-command, Giovanni, watched nervously from the doorway. He'd never seen Dario like this, not even when his sister died. The boss had always been ice, all precision and control. But now he was fire. "Boss," Giovanni ventured, "maybe we should—" Dario's hand slammed down. "They took what's mine." His eyes were black with rage. "Every minute we waste, they—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Across town, in a dank warehouse that reeked of fish and rust, Lila sat with her back against cold concrete. Her wrists were raw from the zip ties, but she barely noticed the pain. All her attention was on her mother. Rosa sat across from her, also bound but calm. Despite the bruise darkening her cheek, her eyes remained steady as she watched her daughter. In the dim light filtering through dirty windows, her hands moved carefully. "Stay strong, my girl," Rosa signed, fingers trembling slightly but determined. "He will come." Lila blinked back tears, twisting her hands against the restraints to respond. "I'm scared for you, Mama." "I'm not afraid." Rosa's signs were fierce, "and neither should you be." A door slammed somewhere above them, making Lila flinch. Heavy footsteps approached. Rosa's eyes hardened as she signed quickly, "Remember who you are. We bend. We don't break." Back in the city, Dario's phone rang. The caller ID made his jaw clench. Marco, the traitor who'd started this nightmare. From his hospital bed, Marco finally broke, spilling everything he knew about the rival family's operations. Dario listened in silence, his free hand curled into a white-knuckled fist. When Marco finished, Dario spoke just 4 words. "You should have died loyal." The phone cracked in his grip as he ended the call. But now he had what he needed: an address near the old fishing district, a warehouse by the river. He could almost smell the salt air and rotting fish. Giovanni appeared with a black duffel bag. Inside lay Dario's weapons, his Beretta, extra magazines, tactical gear. As he methodically checked each item, his hands were steady. The rage had crystallized into something colder, more focused. His men gathered in the garage, loading weapons and checking armor. They knew the stakes. This wasn't about business anymore. This was personal. Their boss, who'd always preached control and precision, was about to unleash hell. Dario strapped on his vest, checked his weapon one final time. The familiar weight of it grounded him, focused his fury into a razor's edge. He looked at his assembled men, killers all, but tonight they'd become something worse. No mercy, he said simply, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. It wasn't an order, it was a promise. Behind him, Chicago's lights glittered like stars fallen to earth. Somewhere out there, Lila and Rosa waited in darkness. He would paint this city red to get them back. The monster inside him, the one he'd kept caged for so long, was finally breaking free. For the first time since his sister died, Dario Valenti was going to war. The night air crackled with tension along Chicago's industrial docks. Shipping containers cast long shadows under the pale moonlight, their metal sides reflecting the occasional muzzle flash that lit up the darkness. The sound of gunfire echoed across the water, sharp and deadly. Inside a decrepit warehouse, Lila's hands trembled as she knelt beside her mother. Rosa's face was tear-streaked but composed, her fingers spelling out comfort, despite the zip ties cutting into her wrists. The concrete floor beneath them was cold and damp, reeking of rust and fear. "They're coming for us," Lila signed, her movements shaky but determined. "I hear them." Another explosion rocked the building's foundation. Their guards cursed, pacing nervously with weapons drawn. Through the high windows, smoke began to drift, carrying with it the acrid smell of burning rubber and gunpowder. Outside, Dario moved like a shadow through the chaos. His usual immaculate suit was gone, replaced by tactical gear that didn't hide the lethal grace of his movements. Blood streaked his face, none of it his own. His men flanked him in formation. But it was Dario who led the charge, his eyes holding the kind of cold fury that turned men to ice. "Clear the east wing," he commanded, voice carrying over the firefight. "No one leaves alive." The order was followed by screams. Dario didn't flinch. He stepped over bodies, each shot from his weapon precise and fatal. Gone was any trace of the man who had learned sign language in secret, who had shown such gentle patience with Rosa. This was the monster beneath the mask, unleashed and hunting. Inside, Lila heard footsteps approaching, heavy boots on metal stairs. The guards grabbed her roughly, using her as a human shield. Rosa tried to stand but was shoved back down. The door burst open in a shower of splinters. Dario stood in the threshold, gun raised, a dark angel of vengeance. His eyes found Lila's instantly, and something flickered in their depths, relief warring with rage. "One more step and she dies," the guard holding Lila snarled, pressing his pistol harder against her temple. Lila felt the cold metal bite into her skin, but her eyes stayed locked with Dario's as her hands moved in desperate signs. "Don't kill for me, please." Not like this. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze. Dario's finger tensed on the trigger. His expression showed no mercy, no hesitation, only the absolute certainty of a predator about to strike. The shot rang out like thunder in the enclosed space. 783 words. The warehouse erupted in chaos. Gunfire peppered the metal walls like angry hornets, and smoke burned Lila's eyes. Through the haze, she saw Dario cutting through the rival men with terrifying efficiency, his movements precise and lethal. Her mother huddled behind a stack of crates, eyes wide with fear. A flash of movement caught Lila's attention. One of the rival gang members raised his gun, aiming directly at Rosa. Time seemed to slow. Dario saw it too. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, putting his body between Rosa and the shooter. The crack of gunfire split the air. Dario's body jerked, crimson blooming across his white shirt. He stumbled but managed to return fire, dropping the shooter before collapsing against the crates. "No!" Lila's scream tore from her throat. She scrambled toward him, bullets whizzing overhead. With strength she didn't know she possessed, she dragged his heavy frame behind a concrete pillar. Rosa followed, pressing herself flat against the wall. Blood pulsed between Lila's fingers as she pressed them against the wound in Dario's shoulder. Her hands trembled, but her first aid training kicked in. She yanked off her scarf, wadding it against the injury. "Stay with me," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Dario." His eyes fluttered open, pain etched across his features. Despite everything, a small smile curved his lips. He reached up with a bloodied hand, cupping her cheek tenderly. "Told you. I'd protect you both." Rosa's hands moved in quick, worried signs. "More coming. We need to move." Gunfire continued to echo through the warehouse, but it was more distant now. Dario's men were pushing the rivals back, through the broken windows. Red and blue lights began to flash. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. "We have to go," Lila said, her voice shaking. "Can you stand?" Dario grimaced but nodded. "Back exit, through the loading bay." When he tried to push himself up, he swayed dangerously. Lila wrapped her arm around his waist, supporting his weight. Rosa took his other side, and together they moved through the shadows of the warehouse. "Leave me," Dario muttered through clenched teeth. "I'll slow you down." Lila tightened her grip on him. "Not a chance," she said fiercely. "You're mine now, remember?" A weak chuckle escaped him, followed by a pained grunt. They reached the loading bay just as the first police cars screamed into the front lot. Through the open door, Lila could see one of Dario's black SUVs idling in the alley, engine running. Together, they half-carried, half-dragged Dario to the vehicle. The driver jumped out to help, and they managed to get him into the back seat. Lila climbed in after him, keeping pressure on his wound, while Rosa took the front seat. As they pulled away into the night, Lila cradled Dario's head in her lap. His blood stained her clothes, but she didn't care. His eyes found hers in the darkness, and she saw something there she'd never expected to see from such a dangerous man. Vulnerability, trust, and something that looked remarkably like love. "Stay awake," she whispered, stroking his face. "We're almost safe." His hand found hers, squeezing weakly. "Already am safe," he murmured, "with you." The SUV sped through the dark streets of Chicago, carrying them away from the chaos of the warehouse. Behind them, police sirens faded into the distance. Lila held onto Dario, her tears falling silently into his hair, while Rosa watched the city blur past through the window. Villa, as Lila helped Dario stagger inside. His normally pristine suit was torn and dark with blood, his face pale beneath the usual olive tone. Each labored breath sent a wave of fear through her chest. "The first aid, kit," she called to one of his men, "and clean towels, now!" Her hands trembled as she eased him onto the leather couch. The bullet had caught him in the shoulder when he'd thrown himself in front of Rosa. The memory of that moment, his body jerking from the impact, her mother's silent scream, made her stomach clench. "Stai bene. Sei al sicuro," Dario muttered, his eyes glassy with fever. His Italian slipped out between harsh breaths as she cut away his shirt. "Mi dispiace. Mi dispiace tanto." "Shh," Lila soothed, though her heart raced at the sight of the angry wound. "Don't try to talk." She cleaned the injury as gently as she could, but even semi-conscious, Dario's jaw clenched against the pain. His skin burned beneath her touch. The fever worried her more than the blood. Freeze infection setting in could be deadly. Rosa appeared at her side with more supplies, her movements quick and sure. Together they dressed the wound, mother and daughter working in the practiced silence that had defined their life together. But this silence felt different, heavy with unspoken fears. Hours passed in a blur of checking bandages, coaxing water between Dario's lips, and watching his chest rise and fall. Lila refused to leave his side, even when his men suggested she rest. She couldn't shake the image of him falling, taking that bullet meant for her mother. The mighty Dario Valenti, who'd torn through his enemies like a storm to reach them, now lay vulnerable because he'd chosen to protect rather than destroy. His hand found hers in his fever dreams, fingers intertwining. Even barely conscious, he seemed to seek her touch. The gesture made her throat tight with emotion. Rosa touched Lila's shoulder, drawing her attention. In the dim light, her mother's hands moved in familiar patterns. "He risked everything," Rosa signed, her expression gentle. "He loves you." Lila's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "I know," she signed back. "I'm scared, Mama. Love is always scary." Rosa's hands replied, "But the right kind of love is worth the fear." Through the night, Lila kept her vigil. She bathed Dario's forehead with cool cloths, whispering words of comfort when he grew restless. His fever slowly broke as dawn approached, painting the room in soft golden light. She was signing absent-mindedly, practicing the fluid motions that had always brought her peace, when his eyes finally opened. Clear now, focused on her hands as they moved through the air. "You came back," she signed, her heart thundering as their eyes met. His hands lifted shakily, forming the signs she'd taught him. Clumsy but determined, like everything about this dangerous man who'd changed her world. "Always," he signed back. Moonlight spilled through tall windows of Dario's office as his captains gathered, their faces drawn with tension. Papers scattered across his mahogany desk, transfer documents, contracts, letters of resignation. The empire he'd built through blood and brutality lay spread before him in neat, orderly rows of black ink. His wound still ached beneath his crisp white shirt, a constant reminder of what he'd nearly lost, what he'd found instead. "You can't just walk away," Marco insisted, his voice rough with disbelief. "The family needs leadership, structure." Dario's fingers traced the edge of a document, remembering how those same hands had once dealt death without hesitation. Now they struggled with simple signs, learning a gentler language. "The family needs change," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I've chosen Antonio as my successor. He understands both sides of our world, the darkness and the light." Murmurs rippled through the room. Antonio was younger, more moderate in his approach. Some would call it weak, but Dario had seen enough blood to last lifetimes. He stood, suppressing a wince as his healing wound protested. "My decision is final. The transition begins tonight." One by one, his captains filed out, leaving only silence and shadows. Dario moved to the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Lila, her presence as familiar to him now as his own heartbeat. "You're brooding," she said simply, coming to stand beside him. Her fingers found his, intertwining naturally. "They think I'm weak," he admitted, turning to face her. "That love has made me soft." Lila's free hand rose to touch his cheek, her eyes searching his face. "You can't live with one foot in each world, Dario. Half in shadow, half in light. It will tear you apart." "I know." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "But you are the light. You and Rosa. You showed me there's more to life than power and control." Her expression softened, but determination still lined her features. "Then choose. All of you. Not just the parts that are convenient." Dario pulled her closer, remembering the terror of almost losing her, the way his world had narrowed to a single purpose, keeping her safe, not because she was his possession, but because she had become his heart. "I choose you," he whispered against her hair. "Every day, every moment." I choose the man you believe I can be. Morning light began to creep through the windows, painting the office in soft gold. The dawn felt symbolic, an end to darkness, a beginning of something new. When Lila tilted her face up to his, their kiss tasted of promise and possibility. Outside, Chicago stirred to life. Somewhere in the shadows, whispers still echoed of the violence that had marked his reign, of the blood price paid for love. But here, with Lila in his arms and sunlight warming their skin, Dario knew he'd made the right choice. The nightmare was over. Whatever came next, they would face it together, in the light. End of scene. The late autumn sun streamed through La Rosanera's newly installed windows, catching dust motes that danced in the morning light. Dario stood in the doorway of his office, one hand absently rubbing the healing wound beneath his tailored shirt. The restaurant hummed with peaceful energy as staff prepared for opening, so different from the tense atmosphere that had pervaded these walls just weeks ago. He watched as delivery men carried in boxes of new menus, their footsteps echoing across the marble floors. The sound of Rosa's hands clapping drew his attention to where she sat at a corner table, surrounded by sample menu layouts. Her face lit up as she pointed out details to the graphic designer beside her, her fingers flying in excited gestures. Lila moved between tables, training new servers. Her quiet confidence had bloomed in recent weeks as she stepped into her role as floor manager. She caught his eye and smiled, a small, private thing that still made his breath catch. The health inspector cleared everything, his new general manager reported, appearing at his side. "We're fully compliant for reopening," Dario nodded, his expression neutral despite the relief flooding through him. Converting the restaurant into a legitimate business had been exhausting work. Every hidden room sealed, every trace of his former empire erased. The staff had been carefully vetted, normal people looking for normal jobs, not soldiers awaiting orders. His phone hadn't rung with demands for violence in 23 days. In the kitchen, chefs prepared for the day, their movements precise but relaxed. No weapons hidden beneath cutting boards now, no secrets wrapped in paper-thin pasta. Just food, just art, just life. Rosa waved him over to her table, pointing proudly at the menu prototypes. Each item was accompanied by clear ASL illustrations demonstrating how to sign the dish name. The wine list included visual descriptors of flavors. Even the daily specials board would have an electronic companion display showing sign language videos. "It's beautiful," he signed, his movements fluid after months of practice. "You've created something special." Rosa's eyes crinkled as she signed back. "We all did. Together." Lila appeared beside them, resting her hand lightly on Dario's shoulder. The casual touch still amazed him. How easily affection came now, how natural it felt to be gentle. "The staff training is going well," she reported. "Everyone's excited about learning basic signs for service." He covered her hand with his own, thumb brushing her knuckles. "Your mother's vision will change lives." "Already has." Lila signed one-handed, smiling at Rosa. The morning passed in a blur of final preparations. Dario stayed mostly in his office, reviewing paperwork that now dealt with payroll and vendors instead of territory disputes and protection money. Occasionally, he'd glimpse Lila through his open door, directing staff with quiet authority. Each time, his heart clenched with a familiar mix of pride and lingering disbelief that this was his life now. He'd walked away from power, from the empire he'd built, through blood and fear. His former captains had been furious, but his chosen successor would lead them well. The underground whispered that Dario Valenti had gone soft, that love had made him weak. Let them whisper. He touched his healing wound and remembered the moment he'd chosen, really chosen, to step into the light. The bullet he'd taken for Rosa had shattered more than bone. It had broken through decades of carefully constructed walls, leaving him raw and real, and finally, blessedly free. Through the office window, he watched Rosa teaching a young server how to sign welcome and thank you. The boy's clumsy attempts made her laugh silently, her whole face bright with joy. Nearby, Lila arranged flowers in crystal vases, her movements precise and peaceful. This was his new empire, not built on fear, but flourishing in its absence. Not maintained through force, but growing through connection. The restaurant would open tomorrow, ordinary and honest and alive. No more shadows, no more secrets. The light streamed in, and Dario Valenti, for the first time in years, let himself stand fully in its warmth. The late summer evening buzzed with anticipation as crowds gathered outside the newly renovated La Rosa Nera. String lights twinkled overhead, transforming the Chicago sidewalk into something magical. The restaurant's facade gleamed, its black rose logo newly gilded against cream stone. Inside, Lila's hands trembled as she smoothed down her black dress. The private dining room had been converted into a gathering space for the launch party, filled with a mix of regular customers, food critics, and members of the deaf community. Her mother Rosa beamed from the front row, elegant in deep purple. 2 minutes, the hostess whispered, touching Lila's shoulder. She took a deep breath, remembering how far they'd come. The bomb-scarred walls were now restored with warm wood paneling. Where blood once stained the floor, plush carpets now cushioned footsteps. Every trace of violence had been erased, replaced by beauty. The room fell silent as Lila stepped up to the small podium. Her fingers found their grace as she began to sign, her voice clear and steady. Welcome to the new La Rosa Nera. In Italian, our name means the Black Rose, a symbol of rebirth and transformation. Her hands flowed through the signs as she spoke, dancing through the air. This restaurant has always been special to Chicago, but tonight we're proud to announce it's becoming truly accessible to everyone. She gestured to the new menus being distributed, each featuring clear descriptions in both English and ASL illustrations. My mother taught me that food brings people together across any barrier, language, culture, or ability. Tonight, we honor that truth. The crowd responded with both applause and the flutter of raised hands, the deaf community's silent celebration. Lila felt tears prick her eyes as she continued. Every item on our menu can now be ordered in sign language. Our staff has been trained in basic ASL, and we're launching a monthly dinner series specifically for deaf families and ASL students. From his position near the kitchen, Dario watched her, his chest tight with emotion. Gone was the timid waitress who once tried to blend into the shadows. In her place stood a woman who commanded attention not through force, but grace. Her hands shaped meaning in the air with the same careful precision she'd once used to teach him his first signs. The gathered crowd broke into enthusiastic applause as Lila finished her speech. She caught sight of several food critics, nodding appreciatively, already scribbling notes. But it was the faces of the deaf guests that moved her most, their expressions of recognition and belonging. Rosa approached the podium, signing proudly to her daughter before turning to address the room herself. Her graceful hands spoke of dreams realized, of finding family in unexpected places. Several guests wiped away tears. The formal presentation concluded, and the party shifted into celebration mode. Servers circulated with appetizers, while guests explored the renovated space. The new private dining room featured soft lighting designed to make signing easier to see, and the bar area had been rebuilt with a clear sightline to facilitate visual communication. Lila moved through the crowd, answering questions and accepting congratulations. She paused near a window, remembering the night she'd first seen Dario here, how frightening his power had seemed then. Now she understood that true strength lay not in violence, but in the courage to change. As the evening began to wind down, and the lights dimmed to a gentle glow, she felt his presence before she saw him. Dario approached quietly. his dark suit immaculate, his eyes holding that mixture of steel and tenderness she'd come to know so well. His hands rose, signing with perfect fluidity. "You gave me a reason to live clean." The Chicago skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the velvet night. Rosa Moreno had gone home hours ago, leaving Lila and Dario alone on the rooftop terrace of La Rosanera. The successful reopening had left them both exhausted but content, and now they sat side by side on the cushioned bench, sharing a bottle of aged wine. Lila's fingers were still tingling from all the signing she'd done that evening. She'd given tours to several deaf guests, explaining the new inclusive menu system and watching their faces light up with appreciation. The memory warmed her more than the wine. "You're smiling," Dario observed, his voice soft in the night air. He'd loosened his tie, and his usual sharp edges seemed softer in the ambient glow of the rooftop string lights. "I'm happy," she signed, letting her hands dance through the words. Tonight felt like a dream. He caught one of her hands, mid-motion, bringing it to his lips. The gesture was tender, so different from the man she'd first met in this very restaurant. His transformation still amazed her, like watching a shadow learn to dance with light. "I have something to tell you," he said, his eyes holding that intensity that still made her breath catch. "I've been working on a surprise." Lila raised an eyebrow, waiting. Dario had been disappearing for hours lately, claiming business matters. But his business wasn't what it used to be. He'd kept his promise about leaving the darker parts of his life behind. "Your old apartment building," he began, watching her face carefully. "I bought it." Lila's eyes widened. They'd moved her mother to a temporary place after everything that happened, but she still missed their old home. "The whole building?" she signed, incredulous. He nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Renovated it too. Your old unit has been completely redone, security system, new appliances, everything your mother needs. And it's yours. Both of yours. No rent, no mortgage. Just a safe place to call home." Tears pricked at Lila's eyes. She thought of her mother, who'd worked so hard for so long, who'd raised her alone in that tiny apartment, who'd never complained even when times were hardest. "Rosa can finally rest," Dario continued, his voice rough with emotion. "No more double shifts for you, no more worrying about bills for her. I want to give you both the peace you deserve." Lila's hands trembled as she signed. "You didn't have to do this. I wanted to," he replied, signing back with the fluency he'd worked so hard to achieve. "Just like I want to do this." He shifted on the bench to face her fully, the city lights casting shadows across his features. His hands moved deliberately, forming each sign with careful precision. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, written in gesture rather than sound. Lila let out a laugh that was half sob, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her hands moved automatically. "You're chaos." Dario's smile widened, and he spoke aloud, his voice filled with certainty. "And you're my peace." The city hummed below them, 1,000 lives moving in their own rhythms, but up here, time seemed to pause. They sat suspended between earth and sky, between who they had been and who they were becoming, between one heartbeat and the next. It was fitting, Lila thought, that this moment should happen here, above the restaurant where they'd first met, where violence had brought them together, where love had eventually transformed them both. The string lights swayed gently in the breeze, casting moving shadows that danced like silent music around them. The garden behind La Rosanera bloomed with white roses and twinkling lights, transforming the space where deliveries once arrived into something magical. Someone had woven fairy lights through the iron pergola, their glow soft against the deepening twilight. The spring air carried the scent of jasmine and fresh-baked bread from the kitchen. Lila stood in the restaurant's office, now her private dressing room, smoothing her simple white dress with trembling hands. Rosa adjusted the delicate veil, her fingers gentle as she signed, "You look like an angel." Mother and daughter shared a tearful smile in the mirror, years of shared struggles reflected in their eyes. Outside, Dario's most trusted men, no longer soldiers but family, filled the small rows of chairs. They wore suits instead of shoulder holsters. Though Lila knew old habits died hard, these men who once inspired fear now stood as witnesses to love, their rough faces softened by the occasion. At precisely 6, when the city's chaos began to quiet, violin music drifted through the garden. Lila took her mother's arm, squeezing gently. Rosa's eyes sparkled with pride as they stepped onto the fairy-lit path. Dario waited beneath the pergola, his usually stern face transformed by wonder. He wore a black suit that made his eyes seem darker, more intense. But his hands, once weapons, now moved with grace as he signed a gentle greeting to Rosa. The gesture made several of his men blink back tears. Rosa kissed Lila's cheek before placing her daughter's hand in Dario's. His fingers trembled slightly against hers, a vulnerability only she could feel. The officiant, an elderly judge who owed Dario a favor, began the ceremony in both spoken word and sign language. When it came time for vows, Dario surprised everyone by stepping back to give his hands room. His signs flowed with practiced precision, each movement full of meaning. "I was a man of violence until your hands spoke peace into my life. You taught me that strength isn't measured by power, but by how gently you can hold what matters most. I promise to protect your joy as fiercely as I once guarded territory, to love your mother as my own, to learn new ways of speaking love every day. My hands will never bring darkness to your light." Tears rolled down Rosa's cheeks as she watched. Even the hardened men in the audience shifted uncomfortably, touched by their boss's transformation. Lila's hands shook as she signed her response. "You were chaos, but you became my shelter. I choose you, not despite your shadows, but because you fought your way to the light. I promise to be your peace, your home, your reason to stay gentle, to remind you that love speaks louder than fear." They exchanged rings, simple bands without the flash of his former life. When the judge pronounced them married, Dario signed, "I love you," before kissing her, his touch reverent and sure. The garden transformed for their first dance, string lights casting golden shadows as a quartet played softly. Dario held Lila close, their movements slow and intimate. Around them, the city that had once been filled with danger and darkness seemed to hold its breath, giving them this moment of perfect peace. Rosa watched from her seat of honor, her hands clasped over her heart. The men who had once been soldiers now sat sharing wine and stories, their laughter gentle in the growing dark. Some attempted clumsy signs they'd learned for the occasion, making Rosa beam with approval. As they danced, Dario leaned down to whisper in Lila's ear, "Thank you for making me human again." She pressed closer, feeling the steady beat of his heart, no longer the rhythm of violence, but of love. The lights twinkled above them like stars, transforming the garden into their own private universe. Here, in this moment, there were no shadows from the past, no threats lurking in corners. Just a man and woman dancing, their love strong enough to change not just themselves, but the world around them. Spring sunlight streamed through La Rosanera's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting warm patterns across the polished hardwood floors. The restaurant had transformed over the past year, not just in its appearance, but in its soul. Where once darkness and danger lurked in every shadow, now light and laughter filled every corner. Dario stood at the bar, his sleeves rolled up as he demonstrated sign language to 3 new servers. His hands moved with practiced grace, no longer the clumsy attempts of a beginner. "Remember," he explained, his voice gentler than anyone would have believed possible a year ago, "when greeting our deaf guests, confidence matters more than perfection." The staff watched in rapt attention, Gone was the fearsome Mafia boss who once made them tremble. In his place stood a man who had found his purpose in building bridges instead of burning them. Across the dining room, Lila moved between tables, checking place settings for the afternoon's special event. Her fingers traced the embossed menus, each one featuring braille and visual signing guides. She paused to adjust a centerpiece, remembering how this same space once echoed with gunfire and threats. Now, it hosted community gatherings, sign language classes, and cultural celebrations. The kitchen doors swung open as Rosa emerged, carrying a tray of freshly baked focaccia. Her eyes crinkled with joy as she set it down, signing rapidly to Lila about the new recipe she'd perfected. The kitchen staff, all trained in basic signing now, watched and tried to follow along, their own hands mimicking her movements. A bus pulled up outside, and excited chatter filled the air as 24 children from the local deaf school poured out. Their teachers guided them inside, where Dario waited to greet them. He signed a welcome, earning delighted gasps from the kids who weren't expecting the tall, intimidating man to speak their language. Rosa beamed as the children settled at their tables, their hands flying in animated conversation. She moved among them like a grandmother at a family gathering, placing warm bread before each one. Some of the kids recognized her from previous visits and signed hello with enthusiasm. Lila watched from the hostess station as Dario knelt beside one shy little girl, showing her how to sign the menu items. His face softened in that special way it only did around children, the last traces of his hardened past melting away. Who would have thought that the man once feared throughout Chicago would find his redemption in teaching children to order pasta? The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. The children practiced ordering in sign language, proud to communicate directly with the staff. Some hearing parents who'd come along watched in amazement as their kids navigated the meal with newfound confidence. As the sun began to set and the last guests departed, Rosa hugged each child goodbye. She signed stories of her own childhood, promising more tales on their next visit. The children left clutching special desserts and signing thank you over and over. After cleanup, when the dining room fell quiet and the staff had gone home, Dario and Lila sat at their usual corner table. The same table where he'd first noticed her signing, where everything had changed. Chicago's lights twinkled beyond the windows, but here inside, their world had narrowed to just them. Dario's hands moved in the dim light, signing with the fluency that came from countless hours of practice. My world was noise. You gave it meaning. Lila's heart swelled as she had countless times before at his transformation. Her fingers danced through the air in response. You were darkness. I chose you anyway. Their hands found each other across the table, fingers intertwining in the peaceful quiet. In the end, it wasn't gunfire or violence that had changed their lives. It was the silent language of love, spoken through gentle hands and brave hearts.